All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ, where the Tennessee baseball team should be hosting a super regional against Southern Miss, but instead are traveling to Hattiesburg because of, let me check my notes here, politics. So that's always fun.
Wait, literally because of politics?
Backroom politics, not like actual politics, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Stuff, really fun NCAA committee stuff, and not RPI stuff, not actual stat stuff, not actual anything that lends itself to reason as to why Tennessee is having to, and Tennessee fans and reporters having to drive 7 hours to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, rather than the 2-seed Southern Miss Golden Eagles coming to Knoxville for the Super Regional. It's a fun time, and they're also going to alternate who's home and who's away. It's just all very dumb, John. It's all
this sounds incredibly stupid all the way around.
Very stupid, but that's the NCAA. That's the NCAA for you, sir. Jon Tayler up there in
New York City.
Man, what a time to be in New York City.
A very smoky New York City, where everything just kind of smells like mesquite barbecue, but not in a good way.
Ooh, does it really actually have a smell outside?
It's a smoky smell. It's like standing outside of a barbecue joint, but without any of the subsequent good meat smells. It's just the smell of burning wood.
What does it feel like? Does it feel like a doomsday apocalyptic situation, or what is it actually?
I mean, there is a period around 3 p.m. today where the sky was just orange, which I can't recall ever seeing before, at the very least not in this city, and I don't think ever in my lifetime. So that was weird. That was definitely a vibe of like, oh, cool. This is good. I think it's good that the sky changed a color that nobody has seen it before here in probably forever. But yeah, it's not ideal. But you know, the hope is that all this smoke from those wildfires in Canada should hopefully dissipate by the end of the week. At least that's the frustrating thing about all this stuff is with any weather or climate stuff is there's really nothing that people on the ground can do. You know, there's nothing any average New Yorker can do about this other than, you know, put on an N95 mask, buy an air purifier, and go about your day. Man, well, stay safe out there, John. And it's crazy. I didn't even realize I thought it was going to be like a day thing or tomorrow, but it could be till the end of the week. Yeah, it's looking like it probably will be until the end of the week. That's wild. That's wild. Crazy. Well, John, this leads us to, you've had some time. You've got to do some doomsday reflecting here on Take Graphs for this week, because I imagine it's going to be a special edition here because of what's going on in New York City. John, what is your Major League Baseball Take Graphs take of the week this week, sir? Well, let's keep it in New York. I think the Mets are in real serious trouble, and to the point where it's like I don't think they're, at least at current construction, I don't think they're a playoff team. And oh wow! So some of that I think is. Hold on, John. Actually, can we pause this for 1 second? Sure. You did this with the Cardinals a month ago, and now the Cardinals are going to win the NL Central. I will note that the Cardinals are bad again now, and that their playoff odds on Fangraphs have slipped below 20%, which is not quite a death sentence, but it's really hard to get from there over the hump. Well, the NL Central will do what they can to get them. They're also back in last place in the division. Which is I think worth noting. Then you're back. You're back on. I'm allowing you to put the Mets to bed because I have a rooting interest in the Mets' demise. So I just want to make sure you don't jinx them into first place. So I think, and one, I have a hard time just imagining that. I mean, you know, I know jinxes are super powerful and genuinely control the universe, but this Braves team is just flat out better than this Mets team. I don't really think that there's much of any debate or discussion that can be had about that one. I think maybe the Mets have a. Nope. They're pretty much no. There's not. I don't think there's a single part of the roster, be it rotation, bullpen, lineup, defense, anything, where the Mets have the edge over Atlanta going forward. So I mean, I think that's also true of every team in the NL East, which is why again the Braves, like I think I've said before, the Braves with me are like Mike Trout with the MVP. Just keep picking them to win that division until they don't win the division anymore. Especially when they don't show any signs that they are actually a bad team. You know, the worst that's happened to them this year is they might not have Kyle Wright for the rest of the season, and I think they broke AJ Minter.
that's pretty much the worst of what's going on in Atlanta right now. Also, Michael Harris is very clearly either not over the back injury he suffered or is still dealing with some complications or whatever it happens to be. But I think there's also some legitimate concern about Harris, particularly given he was not a patient hitter last year, a guy who relied a lot on balls in play and such that, and I think I haven't looked into it deeply, but it's probably worth looking into if there's an adjustment that's been made on him by opposing pitching, but whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, these are relatively minor problems for Atlanta. The back of the rotation, one reliever, the 9-hitter in their lineup who's still a great defensive outfielder. These are manageable problems, even if they don't necessarily work out the way Atlanta wants them to. The Mets have way bigger problems. Half the lineup can't hit, half the team can't field, half the rotation doesn't work. Like, a solid 75% of the bullpen is just bad, and Buck Showalter doesn't seem to have any real clue how to fix any of this, to say nothing about the fact of how weirdly obstinate he and the Mets generally have been with regards to solutions like, why don't we call up Francisco Alvarez and play him? Why don't we call up Brett Baty and play him? Why don't we call up Mark Vientos and play him? And some of that they have come around. Alvarez is now playing semi-regularly, although now that Omar Narvaez is back, it's an open question, I think, as to who is going to be taking the lion's share of time there. Baty obviously has locked down the full-time third base job. Vientos is the one where I don't really understand what the Mets are doing there, why they've brought up a guy who Showalter has seemingly no interest in putting in the lineup. On the one hand, I kind of understand, he's ostensibly the short side of the platoon at DH with Dan Vogelbach, but at the same time, Vogelbach, while he, remains a very patient hitter who's great at drawing walks, is just too passive a hitter who's not letting any of his power play. And part of me wonders, well, why not just give Vientos more time and see what happens? But regardless, that is a small issue, but the Mets have much bigger issues. And I think the biggest issue for me is their entire success, all success for them, both this season and the postseason, relies on two pitchers who are a combined, essentially, like 85 years old, to be not just good, but downright great for them down the stretch, because there is no other assistance coming here. Like, Kodai Senga, for as much as the Ghost Fork is a very good, clearly pitched, it's not one he can routinely and regularly throw for strikes. His command and control don't seem to be major league caliber. Carlos Carrasco is very clearly now on the downside of his career.
He was okay last night until the bottom fell out, but he was okay for a little while.
But when did that happen? Was the 5th inning?
I want to say that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about a guy who, at his best, is throwing 93 and can maybe get you through a lineup 2 times. That's not of real use either during the season or in the playoffs, particularly because by that point I imagine Carrasco might not have anything left in the tank. Jose Quintana is not going to be back till after mid-season at this point because of the health issues he's suffered. There's no real reliable starting pitching depth, something the Mets have proven over and over again throughout the season with how poorly Tyler McGill and David Peterson have pitched. Again, with the lineup, there's a lot of issues in terms of just not getting any production right now out of the outfield corners, or limited production, rather. They're basically running Francisco Lindor into the ground because the team doesn't have any semblance of an adequate backup shortstop right now. Something that I think that really bit them last night with Atlanta. Buck Showalter noting that Atlanta's go-ahead hit came on a ball that Eduardo Escobar probably should have been able to make a play on at shortstop. So, look, for what it's worth, Fangraphs, our odds have not given up on the Mets. We have them as a 53% chance to make the playoffs. Those are better odds than any non-division leading team right now. So clearly I'm going against the math here. But at the same time, when you look at the projected win-loss totals based on our numbers, the following teams are all somewhere between 82 and 85 wins. The Phillies, Marlins, Mets, Padres, Giants, and Diamondbacks. That's 6 teams, plus you have to factor in the possibility that one of those NL Central teams that doesn't win the wild card, that doesn't win the division, could very well get hot toward the end of the season, a la Cleveland last year, and push its way into postseason, into at least wild card contention. If you want a mini take to go inside of that, I genuinely think the Reds might be one of those teams to watch out for coming down the stretch, given how much good young talent they have suddenly accumulated and called up to the major league roster. But I don't want to get into another NL Central digression because it just makes me sad. Point of it being, even if you don't believe in, say, the Marlins going forward, and I really don't think you should. I know they've been off to a little hot streak, but again, that's a team that does not hit. You know, a lot of that is a very inflated record in one-run games that has no predictive value, it's based on absolutely nothing other than essentially the dumb luck of being able to win one-run games. It's not like the Marlins have a dominant bullpen. If anything, they have a pretty weak one. You know, you're still lumping the Mets in with the Phillies, the Padres, the Diamondbacks, and I guess on the outside, the Giants. So, I mean, look, it's not an impossible picture, certainly. Just the Mets have to be better than one of those three other teams in order to make the playoffs, and I don't think that's necessarily impossible. I would probably say they're more likely than not to best at the very least the Giants and probably the Phillies, but at the same time, it is nowhere near a guarantee at this point. Again, they're projected to finish with 85 wins. So are the Padres. So are the Giants. So are the Diamondbacks are projected to finish at 86. The Phillies are projected to finish at 82. That's a really tight band there. And while, again, there's not really any threat of outside competition aside from maybe one of those NL Central teams gets hot, or maybe the Giants get hot toward the end of the season, although they've been a 500 team for basically the last year and a half. You know, again, it doesn't take much for this Mets team, I think, to go south, particularly if they lose one or even worse, both of Scherzer and Verlander, they're in real trouble. And to a degree that I don't really know what solutions exist out there if the Mets want to do something at the deadline to try to improve this. You know, that farm system has some nice pieces in it, and I think part of that you might see coming up again soon in Ronnie Mauricio. The team is out trying out in the outfield corners because his original position is shortstop, but obviously that is not a position he's going to be able to play in New York as long as Francisco Lindor is there. So maybe the idea is to get his bat up into the majors by putting him in an outfield corner. Regardless, I don't know that the Mets have all that many pieces to move if they do want to make a deal. I think similar to San Diego, there's not a lot of reinforcements left in the cupboard in terms either of guys who can call up, who can help out, although I think the Mets are somewhat better off than San Diego in that regard, or in terms of guys you can move, to say nothing of the fact that this payroll is already running $300 million plus. You know, I don't think Steve Cohen is suddenly going to get gun shy. You know, if his people tell him, hey, we're a legitimate playoff contender, we just need one more piece. But I do think there has to be some kind of limit somewhere as to what he can do. And I don't know that this Mets team is necessarily one player away from being a guaranteed postseason squad. Maybe they are. Maybe it is just a matter of finding some additional pitching or being able to trade for a good shutdown reliever type to help improve the bullpen. But the Mets are in a risky place, and definitely I think one of those teams where an injury to one of their stars, I know I've already mentioned Scherzer and Verlander, but Pete Alonso and Lindor as well, would really, I think, derail their season in spectacular ways. And I think if you want an idea of what that looks like, look how the Yankees played when Aaron Judge was out with his hip injury. And I should note he's out again now on the IL with a toe injury that may keep him out longer than the hip injury. The Yankees went completely to pieces without Judge in their lineup because he is essentially the player who makes that lineup work. I think something similar would happen to the Mets if they were to lose Alonso or Lindor. So it's maybe it's too much to say that they're in trouble, but I think they're very much on the knife's edge. You know, as one of those teams that really cannot afford a lackluster month of June, for example. I think the Padres are in a similar position, but I think the Padres' base of talent is overall a little better than what the Mets have. So I'm a little more confident in them. They have at this point, roughly the same postseason odds as the Mets do. So, you know, maybe if you want to hedge it, I would say one of those two teams at this point will not make the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think the Mets are going to be active. Like, there's just no way they're not active. But like you said, they don't have all that many options. Like, I don't know. Does that mean they trade and bring Marcus Stroman back in? Does that mean you look around the league right now and what their realistic options are. I don't know. There aren't a lot of obvious options.
No, because I think something that we've seen is that the sellers in particular in this league don't really have a whole lot to sell at this point. I mean, if you're looking at teams where you can already say for sure, okay, they're going to be selling in some capacity or another, you've got Chicago, the White Sox, although honestly the White Sox are only 2 games worse than the Guardians in the AL Central standings. So they might be able to sit there and convince themselves that there is something, you know, if they're basically on the same footing as Cleveland, then they're still in this race. But Maybe Detroit, although Detroit I think is in a similar position as Cleveland and Chicago, where they're nominally still in this. I should say just fully guaranteed, I think the A's and Royals will be sellers. I think the Nationals will probably look to move whatever short-term pieces they can. But beyond that, I mean, maybe the Cubs get involved, and like you said, maybe there's a possible Stroman reunion in there. But you can't ever predict what the Rockies are going to do. I imagine the Giants will try to stay in the chase as long as they can. Pittsburgh, I don't think, has any real motivation to move right now, especially with how genuinely good this season has been for them. St. Louis is really interesting, but I don't know that there's really a match there, if only because St. Louis's big problem all season has been pitching. And so what are the Mets exactly going to get from them there? I mean, I don't think a Steven Matz reunion is to anyone's interest there.
Noah Syndergaard, who we'll talk about in a little bit, he might be able to move. He might be the odd man out in Los Angeles. There's a reunion option there too.
That's a lot of someone between Syndergaard and the Jacob deGrom Tommy John news. Someone needs to take that photo of the Mets rotation. I think it was a photo that it was deGrom, Syndergaard, Matz, and Matt Harvey all standing together. You know, the one where they have like their arms out, each holding a pitch. Yeah. Someone's got to make that start fading out, Back to the Future 2 style, or I guess Back to the Future 1. Was that a plot point in both of those movies? Was having people fade out of the photos? Like,
John, I have a terrible thing to reveal to you here.
You've never seen Back to the Future?
I've never seen Back to the Future.
I mean, look, I completely understand. That movie to me feels like that's one of those in our current age, at least, or it's like that movie, that dividing line is 40. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're over 40, you've seen Back to the Future almost surely, because you were either a kid when it came out in theaters, or you saw it on VHS, or you saw it on cable, or whatever. If you're under 40, the only real way you were going to see it was on cable or rented.
Yeah. Or your parents sat you down and watched it and was like, this is awesome. Like,
exactly. So I completely understand that. I've only seen Back to the Future once in my life. You know, it's just not a movie I think that really had a whole lot of staying power in terms of, you know, our elder millennials / middle millennials, where I don't think we're really going to pick. It's a Gen X movie, I think, is what I'm going for there. I'm just curious now, when I'm just gonna look up when Back to the Future came out. 1985. Yeah, that's squarely. You know, if you're a Gen Xer, that came out when you were in high school, early college, maybe. So I was -2 in 1985. So the first opportunity I really would have gotten to see that movie would have been roughly like 10 years after it came out. There's just no. Anyway, the point of all that being, there's not a whole lot waiting, or there's not a whole lot out there, I think, for the Mets. You know, the Royals don't have pitching to move that I think anyone would be interested in. The Athletics certainly don't have pitching to move.
I have a Royals update for you, by the way.
If it has to do with Brady Singer, I don't care.
No. Our friend from last week, Jordan Lyles, I saw one of the Royals blogs that I read and keep track of. He had in all caps, Jordan Lyles didn't give up a run in the first inning. Like, that's like the thing, is they're just...
Will miracles never cease?
Like, that was like things are looking up. Like, he didn't give up a run in the first inning. That's the state of the Royals.
We're all feeling great here.
The game's not over after the first inning when Jordan Lyles pitches. That's where we're at.
But I think the most realistic, more realistic for the Mets would be something like the White Sox decide they're out of it and put Lance Lynn on the market. You know, or the Angels try to see if anyone. The Angels try to see if anyone has any interest in Tyler Anderson, who just has not worked out for them at all. Or, you know, the Nationals try to gamble to see if anyone is stupid enough to pick up Patrick Corbin. I think that is the tier of starter that's more realistically going to be available.
Yeah.
The only possible, I think, exception to that would be something like the Brewers completely falling apart and putting Corbin Burns on the market.
Well, there might be an inside job there.
Yes, the David Stearns connection. Mm-hmm. But I also don't think the Mets have the pieces necessary to make that trade happen, and I would be shocked if it weren't, say, Baltimore who'd be more in on that in the first place.
Well, hold on. We know Baltimore's not doing that, John.
Well, I could see Baltimore doing it because, well, I don't know. Baltimore is its own concern. Like, there's a whole other debate to be had about whether or not Baltimore is actually a genuine contender, given how bad their rotation is and how little interest the team seems to have in doing anything about that. But regardless, I just
like Grayson Rodriguez to be good because he got sent down. I want him to figure it out.
I think that's been one of the big issues for Baltimore. I think there was a fair amount of banking on Rodriguez will be at minimum a league average starter, and instead he was nowhere near that. So, but again, I don't really see where that arm is, where a good quality above average arm is coming from, unless it's, taking a chance on, like I said, someone like Lynn or Tyler Anderson, or, if the Rockies make Kyle Freeland available for something. I don't know why I try to assume that the Rockies will do anything that makes even any kind of sense one way or the other. No one knows what they're going to do. No. So, yeah, I consider me officially worried about the Mets in terms of their viability going forward, because I know again our numbers like them, but this has not been a good team through 2+ months of the season, and we have not really seen consistent good baseball from the Mets that would make you feel like, oh yeah, things are going to be fine here. And I think the same holds true for the Padres. They just won today, but they've been very up and down the last week plus. They've been very up and down all season, and they're in a position where, I think they're in a better position division-wise, because I don't think the Dodgers are or Diamondbacks are as good as the Braves. But I think the other flip side of that is that they have two teams in front of them in the Dodgers and Diamondbacks who are both just flat out good. And so I don't really know what division hopes they have left. I mean, our odds put them at a 10% chance of winning the division, with the Dodgers at 63% and the Diamondbacks at 17%, and the Giants also at 10%. So the odds really do not like San Diego for anything other than a wild card. And at about the same percentage odds as the Diamondbacks, Padres, Mets, and Marlins. And again, I think of those, of those four teams, I feel pretty comfortable saying the other side of that take, I guess, the Marlins are not going to be a playoff team. I just don't see it.
No, the Marlins are not. Although, what does Arraez's batting average need to get to before you're like, okay, they have to by law, because this man's nearing 500 at the middle point of this season?
What has he been hitting? So he's now, I'm just looking this up because I don't know the number off the top of my head. So Luis Arraez is currently hitting, he's actually 1 for 2 today.
Okay.
He is currently hitting 402 with a 451 OBP and a 495 slugging percentage. I'm also curious when the last time a guy put up a 400 season was. I'm gonna play index that one after this, but
okay.
I want to look at his game log just real quick, because it seems like over the last 3 weeks in particular, he's been just destroying. Here, let's just do it since May 16, using Fangraphs special little game logs.
Mm-hmm.
Since May 16, Luis Arraez has hit 434, 476, 539. That's 33 hits in 84 plate appearances. Fun fact, 0 home runs.
He's a treasure. Protect him at all costs.
It's really, I think... a little bit of a digression. I don't think Arraez hits 400 for the full season, just because I think it is borderline impossible to hit 400 over a full season. There's a reason it hasn't been done since 1941, since Ted Williams, who was arguably the greatest hitter who ever lived. But I do think it's incredibly realistic for Arraez to end up somewhere in that 350 to 380 range and basically be the latter-day Tony Gwynn in that regard. Which I understand, too, the idea. It's like, oh, that's sacrilege. No one can be Tony Gwynn. Tony Gwynn's skill set is very special, but it's not impossible to replicate.
Yeah.
Tony Gwynn was a guy who was very good at making contact, who never struck out, who put the ball in play constantly because he also didn't draw much in the way of walks, and was just adept at hitting line drives and going the other way. That's Luis Arraez. I mean, their skill sets are pretty comparable. I think the sacrilege would be in saying Luis Arraez will be the next Tony Gwynn, because no, that requires another dozen years of doing this. But I think to say Luis Arraez has Tony Gwynn's skill set and can arrive at Tony Gwynn's outcomes, I think that's entirely realistic. I mean, I'd be stunned at this point if Arraez ended up hitting below 350 for the season. But I do think, consider that really all you need to get off the 400 path is not even really a 2-week slump, just 2 weeks of hitting 300. That's enough to get Arraez back down, almost permanently back down below 400. So regardless, I for all his heroics, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, I still don't think the Marlins are a playoff team unless they add 2 more Luises Arraez to the lineup.
Well, there you go. Jon Tayler. And happier news, Elly De La Cruz made his debut.
Yeah.
He's going to be fun. He's good for baseball.
Yo, he and O'Neal Cruz need to team up for some kind of duo act, some kind of barnstorming duo act during the offseason, where they just go around hitting balls a million miles and throwing balls 100 miles. That would be it's crazy thing O'Neal Cruz, who just feels like such a physical like anomaly, that the Reds are like, okay, we have that, but somehow like taller.
Yes.
Like it makes absolutely no sense. What are they putting in the water down in the Dominican Republic, man? Like those guys are
6'5", right? Let's see. Yes, 6'5".
Elly De La Cruz is 6'5", throws 100 miles an hour, hits 100 miles an hour, and runs with the same rough sprint speed as Trey Turner. That's insane. That is an insane combination of abilities. That makes absolutely no sense. I think it's kind of equivalent. Do you remember that moment? And I'm kind of speaking vaguely here because I'm obviously not a football guy, but it felt like there was a moment in the last 10 years in the NFL when the level of physical freaks just started like exponentially increasing. When guys like DK Metcalf or maybe not Aaron Donald, because Aaron Donald is just a thing unto himself, but like those dudes who could just easily like pivot between like linebacker and defensive end and just can play with one hand on the dirt or just standing up, or those wide receivers who are built like strong safeties but also somehow can run like 4.240s. Like I think baseball is basketball, I think Victor Wembanyama is obviously the biggest example there, someone who's just a pure genetic freak. But and maybe this is just true of all professional sports at this point, but like it just feels like the level of guys in baseball who can do things that just shouldn't really be possible. Obviously led by Ohtani, but now including guys like Cruz and De La Cruz, and other dudes like that. It just feels like we're at a real point where this is now starting to become like more commonplace, that these dudes just come up here with these utterly bonkers tools. But I don't know. I mean, it is really cool though. I'm very.
The Reds are awesome. The Reds are kind of fun now.
That's what I'm saying. Like my mini take inside all of that was that if there's an NL Central team that I think is a genuine dark horse playoff contender, leaving the Brewers aside since they're on top of the division, I would rather put my money on the Reds than any of the other 4 teams in the NL Central. You know, I think
and that's 2.9% playoff odd right now.
They do, and I think I would give them probably no better than 10% ultimately, because I think there is still a lot of particularly the rotation and the bullpen is just not very good. Yeah. But there's a lot of really good young talent there. There's De La Cruz, there's Matt McClain, there's Spencer Steer, there's Jonathan India having his bounce back, there's TJ Friedel, there's Jake Fraley, there's Andrew Abbott, who they just called up, there's Alexis Diaz, who has been completely unhittable as their closer. I mean, it's actually kind of funny to think there's going to be a real debate as to who the Reds all-star is this season, because they have a lot of genuinely good options. I mean, I think I'd probably end up
India, right?
It's either India or Diaz, I would think, and it's mostly just going to depend on roster construction, whether or not the NL wants another infielder or a closer. But regardless, like there are some really, really good players on that team, really, really good young players too. And I think that's just really worth noting for guys like. We know that De La Cruz obviously is what, 21 years old. He's a tiny baby. But I just want to go through some of the ages for these guys on the Reds. Just note, like, this is not a one, like, Steer is 25, India is 26, Fraley is 28, Friedel is 27, Tyler Stevenson, who I haven't mentioned, in part because he's pretty much a DH at this point, but still has some thump in his bat, 26, McClain is 23, De La Cruz obviously is 21. The pitching staff, Hunter Green I can't believe I forgot to mention Hunter Green in all of this. Hunter Green is 23. Nick Lodolo, who unfortunately is hurt, is 25. Diaz is 26. Andrew Abbott is 24. Brandon Williamson, who's been pretty good for them as himself a former top prospect, 25. There is lots and lots of under 30 talent already on this roster. And then you start looking at their prospect list too. Just, going by the prospect list we put together over at Fangraphs back in early January, top 2 on there were De La Cruz and Steer. But then you've also got Noelvi Marte, the big piece who came over in the Luis Castillo trade, who's currently in AA, 21 years old. Cam Collier, I think their first-round pick in last year's draft, 18. Edwin Arroyo is number 3 on our list, is 19. Chase Petty, who they got for Sonny Gray from Minnesota, number 6 on that list, he's 20. There's McClain at number 7 is 23. Connor Phillips is in AA and is probably going to be a good relief arm. Is I think just turned 22. There again, this is a system with a lot of talent. You go by our Fangraphs future value designations. You've got 4 guys at a 50 future value plus. De La Cruz obviously at a 60. Petty at a 45 plus. McClain and Phillips, Williamson and Michael Ciani all 45 or better. 45 or better indicates pretty much a regular. 45 is a regular, 45 plus is regular with all-star ceiling. 50 is pretty much regular all-star, and a 60 plus, a guy like De La Cruz, is a dude who's going to get MVP votes at some point in the future. At least that's our... And again, for another guy I forgot to mention, Christian Encarnacion Strand, who's been tearing up AAA and is a realistic option for this team at first base if Joey Votto comes back and just doesn't look right. So again, tons and tons of young talent on this roster, on the farm system. It's it doesn't, in my mind, make up for how Cincinnati has gotten to this point, which is to say by being as craven and just fan unfriendly as humanly possible. The Castellinis, I think, are still horrific owners who should be nowhere near this team, because I think if you're a Reds fan looking to the future, you're feeling good about it, but you're also probably worrying, is this ownership group going to build around this group when the time comes, or are they just going to say, well, these are the guys, and if they don't do it on their own, too bad. I worry about that, but I don't want to rain on a parade at the moment. So
put a bow on it is because the Pirates, people forget, had this amazing start, and obviously injuries and other stuff got in the way, and they've fallen off. But I wonder, because we're both pretty optimistic about where both rebuilds are headed now to this point. I don't think it works out for both. It rarely happens like that when the small market, low spending teams they put it all together. Who would you bet on more likely to make this leap from bad to okay to good to maybe great over the next 2 to 3 years? Would you bet on it being the Reds, who went to NL Central or two in the next 2 to 3 years, or would you bet on the Pirates? Because I don't think it works well for both.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think the reality is it just depends which farm system you like more, because neither of these teams, I think, is going to be involved in free agency over the next couple of years to the degree that they're actually adding the pieces necessary.
But at least we've seen it a little bit with Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it more with Cincinnati, and I think I like Cincinnati's long-term bets a little better. I think part of that is just the Pirates seem to have had some genuine trouble getting pitchers to make that adjustment from the minors to the majors. We're seeing that. We've seen it with Rancy Contreras, who got absolutely demolished today by the A's. We've seen it with Luis Ortiz, who they called up earlier in the season and has not pitched particularly well. Quinn Priester, who granted has not made it to the majors, but probably the next guy that they're looking to try on in that group. And there's also just, for me, I think most of what the Pirates, most of that Pirates group is already there. The guys that they're really waiting on are, in particular, Endy Rodriguez and Henry Davis, one of whom will have to come off catcher. And eventually, but quite a ways away, Termarr Johnson, who's probably... our ETA on him is 2028. He's not even 19 years old yet. He won't turn 19. Actually, he'll turn 19 in 4 days. And who is currently hitting 260, 421, 375 at A-ball, which, granted, for a 19-year-old at A-ball, that's pretty good. But that's still a ways away from the majors. And I think, even if you think 2028 is too pessimistic, realistically, 2025, I think, is the fastest you might see Termarr Johnson. Whereas... with Cincinnati, I think you've already seen Steer and De La Cruz come up. You've already seen McLean come up. You've already seen Williamson come up. You're going to see Encarnacion Strand, I think, before the end of the year. I think there's a pretty good shot Noelvi Marte and Chase Petty are on this team by this time next year. Petty is currently an advanced A-ball and pitching very well, albeit only in 16 innings. Noelvi Marte, as I said, is in Double-A currently, hitting 293, 366, 484 as a 21-year-old. So, honestly, there's a chance Marte might get a September call-up if he keeps hitting at that rate. I think the future for the Reds, I think their prospects are a little better, and I think they're all closer to the majors in a way that they can make a bigger impact than what Pittsburgh has. I think the error bars are probably bigger on Cincinnati, rather, whereas I think Pittsburgh is a little more stable, but I think Pittsburgh's stability is a team where at their best, they're probably going to be somewhere in that low 80s win projection. I think Cincinnati, with the right additions and the right development, can get higher than that, because I think particularly when you have guys like De La Cruz and Marte, who have such ludicrous physical tools, the ceiling is just that much higher.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say it's the Reds who break through. Among this group, and sorry, Pirates fans, we want it to be both, but I would love
it to be both, and I think that's part. I think what especially gives me pause again is the ownership situations for both. Neither the Castellinis nor Bob Nutting have shown any inclination to spend as needed. You know, there's no reason that the Reds can't be better than they are even right now. You know, after an offseason where the most they did was go and get Will Myers, you know, who's probably going to get DFA'd before the All-Star break at this rate.
Awful. He's
been very, very bad. And again, that was probably the biggest signing Cincinnati made all offseason. You know, just looking back at their major transactions from the winter, you know, they signed here they got Luke Maile, Silvino Bracco, Kurt Casale, Will Myers, Luke Weaver, Derek Law, Chad Pinder, who I don't think is on the roster anymore. That's it. They really didn't do anything this offseason. Not even really much in the way of trades. The only trade they made was getting Will Benson from Cleveland, you know, and Will Benson is a perfectly fine fifth outfielder, but I don't think anyone's idea. Oh, sorry, they also traded Blake Sable to the Giants, but I think Sable was a Rule 5 pick, so that doesn't really matter. Point being, there's a lot of room for Cincinnati to do more. You know, they did nothing this offseason.
It does make me a little bit nervous where it's like the Jonathan India, are they going to keep him past the deadline stuff? That scares me a little bit. Where it's
I think
he's a core guy. Stop overthinking this. Like, don't move Jonathan.
Well, the interesting thing for the Reds there is going to be how do they figure out the infield mix between De La Cruz, India, McLean, eventually Marte, possibly Steer, although they moved him out to an outfield corner with De La Cruz playing third last night and McLean at shortstop and India at second. I mean, I think ultimately it probably just shakes out to India at second, or McLean at short, Marte at third, or not Marte, De La Cruz at third, and just kind of reconfigure as necessary if Marte comes up. Maybe McLean is a guy who could work as some kind of super utility bat who can play in the outfield corners as well. But, I mean, the outfield's crowded too with Steer, Friedel, and Fraley, and I guess if you want to include Nick Senzel, but I think it's probably okay to let go of Nick Senzel at this point. Really, I mean, the only real space where I think the Reds, at this point in the lineup, where the Reds really are like, oh, this is not working out, is probably first base, and that a lot of that's just going to depend on how Votto comes back. And again, even if Votto comes back and it's just nowhere near Joey Votto, they've got Encarnacion Strand down in AAA. They can call him up and see what they can do. So, you know, it's going to be interesting how the Reds try to figure out that logjam that they have in terms of there are now too many good players coming up, but that's a really good problem to have. It is never a bad thing to have too many good players, because the other side of that is, well, hey, maybe now you can trade some of those guys to get some help on the rotation.
Yeah,
because I think that's another space where the Reds really do need that help right now. I mean, that, like I said, that is probably the weakest part of the team right now, aside from the non-Alexis Diaz parts of the bullpen, I would say. I mean, part of the problem is a guy like, one, that Graham Ashcraft has taken an enormous step back from last year, and that Nick Lodolo is currently hurt. But yeah, actually, I'm going to call the rotation a bigger problem than the bullpen. You can figure out a bullpen unless your name is Dave Dombrowski. The rotation right now being Hunter Green, followed by Luke Weaver, followed by Ben Lively. Even though Weaver and Lively in particular has pitched quite well, Weaver's been very bad. They need help there. And I think that is, and calling Abbott up is one part of it, but maybe part of that solution too is taking from that stockpile of prospects you have and seeing who out there has an arm that is young and cost controllable, that wants, you know, that could use hitting help.
There you go. Jon Tayler,
yes.
Team Spotlight, number 1, the Chicago White Sox, who might win the AL Central now.
I mean, it's not impossible because the AL Central is pointless. It's a damn garbage dump. Sure, why not? I mean,
they're playing better baseball over the last few weeks.
I don't think they could have played worse baseball than what they were, though. That's the thing. Like, they're playing better in large part because, yeah, they literally could not do worse. I mean,
yeah,
their record in the month of April was 7-20. Like, they literally could not have done worse than that. I mean,
yeah.
Even going 19-14 since then, which I should note, 19-14 is a .575 winning percentage, or a 93 win pace over a full season. That still has them 8 games below 500. Like they dug themselves such an enormous hole with that month of April that I genuinely don't think they can get out of it.
They need at least one of their young arms to be good. That would be good.
I mean, it seems like Michael Kopech is maybe kind of sort of starting to move in that direction.
They really need him to.
They really, yeah. There's been a lot of inconsistency there. I think the thing that has killed them in particular has been the inconsistency on the part of Dylan Cease. You know, there was a guy who finished Also, what is it with AL Cy Young finishers? Dylan Cease finished second in that voting last year, and he's got an ERA plus of 94 and an ERA of almost 5. Alek Manoah finished third in the Cy Young voting. He's been so bad this season, he got sent down to the Florida Rookie League to work his problems out, But
Tim Henderson has been quietly awful.
Yeah, I think some of that has been just injuries, but yeah, there's just so much here that hasn't gone right where I don't really know what the solution is. For example, like Andrew Benintendi has a 90 OPS plus. I don't think he's necessarily 10% worse than league average going forward, but at the same time, his OPS plus is, it was, 99 in 2019, 106 in 2021, and 120 last year. So if you're effectively assuming, and for what it's worth, that was a shortened season in 2022, and most of that work was done with Kansas City, not with the Yankees who traded for him. Is there any real reason to believe that you're going to get anything better than maybe a 110 OPS plus out of him going forward? Elvis Andrus and Romy Gonzalez at second base, that's not a functional solution, Andrew Vaughn is barely a league average hitter. Yohan Moncada hasn't been a league average hitter. Eloy Jimenez is barely a league average hitter. Moncada.
It's probably over, right? The Moncada ever figuring it out. We should probably move on.
I think for him, a large part is just he's never been able to stay healthy enough to get consistent playing time and really work on stuff. But I think you make a good point here is that these are not young guys anymore. I mean, Vaughn is 25, Jimenez is 26, Luis Robert is 25. Those guys are still relatively young, and there might be another gear in there somewhere. But Anderson is 30, Moncada is 28, Benintendi's 28. Yasmani Grandal is 34. There's.
Can I do a bit?
Yes. I welcome any and all bits.
It's one of my favorite bits.
Okay.
John.
Yes.
Did you know that the Chicago White Sox have never got good production out of right field since Magglio Ordonez?
Yeah, that's been a black hole for them forever. And
Guess what's still a black hole for the Chicago White Sox?
It's right field, where they're doing stuff like playing Gavin Sheets, despite the fact he doesn't know how to play right field. This team has Clint Frazier on the roster right now. That's how bad things have gotten outfield-wise.
Coach Clint Frazier for a year.
There are just so many underperforming aspects of this team that I don't really know what the belief would be that things are going to get better. Like, is there really someone in the White Sox front office who thinks that Joe Kelly is going to be better than what he's been? He's got a 4.34 ERA and a 1.02 ERA plus. That's about what you should expect from Joe Kelly. I'm really glad that Liam Hendricks is back, but the rest of that bullpen is really bad, with the exception of Kendall Graveman and whoever Gregory Santos is. I think that might be a George Santos alias. I'm not actually 100% sure. The White Sox are doing stuff like counting on Lance Lynn and Mike Clevenger to be better. Like, I really don't know what the optimism is that that's going to happen. They're pulling Clint Frazier out of essentially semi-retirement to try to patch a hole for them. They're giving a lot of playing time to Romy Gonzalez and Elvis Andrus. There are simply too many holes on this roster and too many underperforming players where there should be no real belief that there is going to be, real overperformance at this point for me to feel confident in them being anything other than, I think at this point, a 76 or 77 win team. I mean, you go by our playoff odds, we currently have the White Sox projected to finish 75 and 88 and 87. And that feels right to me. Again, they're 8 games under 500. They've been playing better since the month of April, but they'd have to play at a ludicrously good pace to get out of the hole they dug. And again, that's all also assuming that everyone stays healthy, because for the most part, this White Sox team is pretty healthy right now. They're obviously going to have...
They're healthy and bad. It's the best combination.
And that's the other thing is you can't really assume, like, Eloy Jimenez is probably going to get hurt again. Moncada is probably going to get hurt again. Tim Anderson has a bad injury history. Benintendi has a bad injury history. Luis Robert has a bad injury history. Like, they cannot get consistent production out of their lineup, in part because everyone's hurt all the time. So, yeah, I don't see where it comes from. And also, this is just overlooking the fact, too, that they have an awful farm system that is of absolutely no use in terms of either getting them some additional depth or impact pieces, or in being able to trade for the kind of help that they would need, to get another pitcher, to get a better outfielder. Like, what out of the White Sox system is going to do that? For our White Sox top prospect list, which granted came out in late December, so there are a couple updates still needed to be made. Colson Montgomery and Brian Ramos are their two best hitting prospects. They both started the year in Double A. Montgomery is currently hitting 146 in Double A with a weighted runs created plus of 19. So that's not really an option. Ramos is hitting 227 with a weighted runs created plus of 85, and this is his second try at Double A, so that's also not particularly what you want to see. Number 3 on this list is Oscar Colas, who they've already tried and given up on. Number 4 is Noah Schultz, who I believe was their first draft pick last summer, so not a guy that they're going to see anytime soon. Like, Lenyn Sosa is number 5 on this list, and Lenyn Sosa profiles as a utility guy going forward. You know, this is just a very shallow farm system that is not going to help this team this year, either in terms of, getting guys who are going to help the major league roster, or in terms of producing pieces that are going to help them trade for guys to help the major league roster.
Go White Sox.
Yeah, I feel like I'm being bleak, but honestly, White Sox fans know all this. You know, they have long accepted that this team is at a stage
we were born in the darkness.
Something needs to change with the White Sox, and I think all White Sox fans are in agreement at this point that there needs to be. And I feel like we've asked it every season at this point, but it does just feel like there cannot be more Rick Hahn at this point. There just can't. He has shown no ability to make this team perform better, despite having endless attempts to do so.
I agree. As we wrap up here tonight, John, the Baltimore Orioles, 37-23, 5.5 back from the Rays, who are 44-19.
They have the third best winning percentage in the American League, and they're further out of first place than any other second place team in baseball.
That's the most Orioles thing possible. Is they're just awesome. They're building off last year, and just they have no chance of probably hosting a playoff series.
No, I mean, I think there's a genuine chance the Orioles don't make the postseason.
Well, I think it's going to come down to them or the Blue Jays, right? Like, it's just who can keep it going, because I think the Yankees are going to be a postseason team.
I think so too, but I will amend that if this Aaron Judge injury ends up being something where he's out for months instead of weeks.
Wasn't it he on 10-day? Did I say, is he on the 10-day IL?
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like the Yankees are 100% clear on how long he's going to be out. So, again, if this is just another minor...
Giancarlo Stanton and his availability for these kind of situations, John.
But, I mean, I think the Orioles have as good a shot as anyone in that pile of American League contenders. But, I mean, you know, we've talked about it already, that the pitching staff is a real problem.
Yeah.
You know, that...
But they have the pieces. Like, if the Orioles wanted to be buyers, as they should, at the deadline, there are, like, Marcus Stroman actually does make sense. He wouldn't cost all that much. Like,
and he'd be a great fit with this defense, too.
Right? Like, just go do that. We're not asking you to just go all out here.
No, this team just needs one competent starter who we can trust. Because at this point, like, no, they're not going to get an ace. I think the same problem that I was talking about with the Mets faces the Orioles, in that I don't even know where that number one pitcher would be coming from. You know, like, unless the Angels say screw it and make Ohtani available, which I sincerely doubt they're going to do, who is the other team currently holding on to a number one caliber starter where you're looking at them and going, well, you guys got to give him up, right? I mean, if it's the White Sox, maybe it's Lucas Giolito, and I think that would be fascinating. Yeah. I think if Cleveland falls completely out of it, maybe they take some calls on Shane Bieber to see what they can get in return. I think, the Mariners obviously aren't going to do anything with Luis Castillo, regardless of whether or not they make the playoffs. The A's don't have that kind of starting pitcher to offer. Neither do the Royals. Neither do the Red Sox. Like, maybe you're banking on. Well, I mean, again, what are you banking on? The Phillies
Kyle
deciding...
Freeland feels like an Oriole.
Oh, that would be so bleak. Just if that's the
such
best
an Oriole
the Orioles
trade,
can do. I do wonder if, for example, I mean, I think a lot would have to go wrong with the Phillies for them to do this, but do they make Aaron Nola available?
No, it's not a Dombrowski move.
I don't think it is either, you know, and I think it's worth wondering because he is an unrestricted free agent after this coming season. It doesn't seem like the team is really in any kind of extension talks with him. I haven't seen that cross the news in quite a bit. Again, I think it would take the Phillies falling apart to an unimaginable degree for them to do something like that. But again, I think
they figure something out with Nola long term. Now, if it was anyone from there, I think Wheeler would be more likely to get moved than Nola.
Possibly, but I think either way, I just have a hard time seeing Philly doing that. I think, again, the one ace I see who could realistically become available if things go completely down the crapper for the team in question is Corbin Burnes on the Brewers. I think that is every contender's best shot at getting a number one starter, is hoping and praying that the Brewers fall apart over the next 2 months.
Also, you don't even have to hope for that. They'll trade.
I mean, that's true. They traded Josh Hader last year, despite the fact they were literally in first place.
They have to get bad. They really don't.
I think it'd be more likely for them to deal Burnes if Brandon Woodruff were currently healthy.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem, because they can't guarantee that they're going to get Woodruff back at 100%. So I think that, again, unless things go completely haywire, I think they hold on to Burnes and just try to ride it out one more time. But again, otherwise, I don't know where that ace is coming from. You know, the Giants don't have one. The Rockies, or they have Logan Webb, but they signed him to a long-term deal. They're clearly not moving him. The Rockies don't have one. The Reds are clearly not going to move Hunter Green or anyone else. It really does look like it's, you know, if you're in the market for a pitcher, hey, congrats, you're bidding on Marcus Stroman. Yeah. You know, you're bidding on Tyler Anderson. You're bidding on Lance Lynn. You're bidding on, I don't even know, James Paxton if the Red Sox can't move any further up in the postseason odds. I would just like to note Elly De La Cruz has hit his first major league home run, 115 miles an hour, 458 feet off of Noah Syndergaard.
Oh, and off Syndergaard, no less.
Yeah, which I know we wanted to talk about.
Everything comes full circle here.
I don't think Syndergaard helps anyone this year. I think he's fundamentally finished. I think for a guy like that, I think the loss of the velocity.
Oh my God! I just watched this in real time.
I want to see it, but it sounds like it's absolutely obscene.
It's an obscene homer. It's an obscene dinger, John.
But I think
also him in the batter's box is low-key hilarious.
It's really funny. He's like 1,000 feet tall. Mm-hmm. I think Syndergaard is one of those guys, a la Matt Harvey, where once the velocity disappeared, that's it. Yeah. Because it was all based on that velocity. Now give me 20 seconds because I'm going to watch this Elly De La Cruz home run. Oh, good God, no. Holy, that got out of the stadium almost.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it's a 458. My.
That was utterly crazy. Okay. Yeah, I don't think Syndergaard is of any help to anyone. I wouldn't be surprised if I know the Dodgers are in pitching hell to a certain degree, but I don't see how they can keep starting him. You know, he's out there getting absolutely torched by guys. Another in-game update. Pete Alonso, who I mentioned as one of the guys the Mets cannot afford to lose.
It's recording.
But this isn't a scoring thing. Is coming out of the game after getting hit by Charlie Morton's 97-mile-per-hour fastball on the left wrist. That is going to keep every Mets fan tonight who is already coughing their lungs out. No offense, obviously, to Mets fans. I'm right there with you. Just one more thing to worry about for the rest of the evening.
Also, Pete's had a rough last 24 hours as a whole. Like him talking in the dugout to Bryce Elder after, throw it to me again, and then you end up losing. Hate to see it.
Yeah, I mean, look, as the immortal Jamie Vardy of Leicester City put it, chat shit, get banged. Like, that's how it comes around. And I know... The thing is, like, Pete Alonso, I think, is enough of a baseball guy to understand that and not get mad about it. You know, I think he gets that, you know, comes around, goes around stuff. But, yeah, not something Mets fans want to see there. Holy.
No. But what's he on pace for? Like 65 dingers this year? He's at 22, I think.
45 or 50, something along those lines. It's nonsense.
They cannot afford to lose Pete Alonso.
No, they cannot. So I was saying, one of the 4 guys on that team who they can't afford to lose for a long stretch of time and under any circumstances. You know, that is just a death blow to that lineup if he's not healthy. But yeah, Syndergaard, I don't think there's any juice left in that tank. I think he would have to reinvent himself completely as a pitcher. Like, change the arsenal, change the sequencing, change everything for him was built off the velocity, both in terms of how hard he threw his slider and fastball and changeup, and then the separation that created for him. Without that velocity, there's just nothing there.
No, there's not. Well, there you go, Jon Tayler.
Yes.
Fangraphs.com. Go check it out this week. What can the good folks check out from you and the team over on Fangraphs? Dan Sombrowski wrote about Elly De La Cruz, I think.
He did, and he's the one I'm taking that lead from on the Reds being a genuine dark horse NL Central contender. I think for anyone who heard me say that and had their head do a full 360, check out Dan's piece. He makes a very compelling argument. Definitely think you should look at that. For you college baseball sickos out there, on Thursday, Michael Bauman is going to have a piece on the NCAA regionals. He is our resident college baseball sicko. If you are at all interested in the NCAA tournament and the backroom smoke-filled politicking that apparently has been going on, I'm sure Michael will dive into that with gusto. And continuing our top prospect list, on Friday, we have the Houston Astros top prospect list coming from Eric Longenhagen and Tess Taruskin, our prospect experts. We are pretty close to done, I think, with our prospect lists for 2023. Just looking now at the list, once we add Houston, we'll have about 6 teams left. Yeah, or 5 teams left. Pretty much the entirety of the AL West. The Padres and the Royals are pretty much all that's left. So check out the Astros list when it drops on Friday, or at least that's when it's scheduled to drop. Otherwise, we're just checking in with the league as a whole. Jay Jaffe's going to have a Mike Trout check-in because it's always cool to look in on Mike Trout. Dan Zimborski is going to have a Zips stats update, kind of using his projection system to see which players have been lucky or unlucky, so to speak, in terms of their stats versus their expected stats. A lot of cool stuff coming as always. And worth noting, too, we are 1 month out roughly from the draft, which MLB, in its just infinite stupidity, moved to All-Star Weekend to make everyone's life a living hell. But the draft is one of our big content weeks. I don't know what the best way to put that is, but Eric and Eric and Tess are going to be doing a lot of work around that. I assume Michael will also be involved as, again, our resident college baseball sicko. So if you're at all draft interested, draft curious, keep an eye out throughout the rest of June and going into July. I'm sure Eric will have a big board update on the first round of the draft with his current number one. I believe as of his last update, which granted I think was right at the start of the season, that number one was Dylan Cruz. I'm just checking now out of just sheer. Guess. Yeah, I have a hard time imagining baseball. He is still playing baseball, and he is very, very good. A reminder that if you do want to see our MLB draft rankings, just go to the board, which has our whole prospect list. Click on the MLB draft tab up at the top. And in fact, you'll see that his current top 5 is Dylan Cruz, TCU's Braden Taylor, which is the most college baseball name imaginable. Florida's Wyatt Langford.
He's good.
Max Clark, currently at Franklin High School in Indiana, and a Vanderbilt commit at number 4. And just for you, Chase Dollander, number 5.
Is he at 5? Okay, I thought he would have slipped out maybe.
No, he is at number 5. For those of you who are following college baseball closely and are wondering about Paul Skeens, he's there at number 8.
Yeah, he's really good too.
Super pitcher out of LSU. Has he played two-way at all at LSU, or is he strictly a pitcher at this point?
Strictly a pitcher. Where's the Clemson dual threat pitcher and hitter?
Clemson.
Caden Bryce.
Let me see. We do not have any Clemson players on our current draft big board.
Interesting.
So if you're come by Fangraphs eventually, maybe we'll get that Clemson guy on there. If you're a Clemson fan who's listening, which I'd be kind of impressed because I was pretty much under the impression that no one in Clemson knew how to read.
Wow.
Look,
they don't know how to do. Beat the Tennessee Volunteers, Jon Tayler. Whether it's the Orange Bowl, the regional, it doesn't matter.
Look,
you can't win.
I'm just walking the path that Steve Spurrier laid out for me. Okay, one of the head ball coach's all-time greatest jokes about the library at Clemson catching fire and him saying it's such a shame. I heard they'd almost finished coloring in all the books too. I miss Steve Spurrier so much. I would not want to talk to him about politics or culture for even a second. Mm-hmm. But I would love to just hang out around him as he just pounds Coors Light and just hits tee shots at at a driving range or something. I think that would be a fun time.
It'd be a fun time. Jon Tayler, always a pleasure. I will talk to you next week.
Well done, nephew. Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.